In this video, I'm going to take a look at my top 10 mistakes that admins should never make in Microsoft 365, and more importantly, what you can do to avoid them. Stay tuned and you'll learn something. Greetings my fellow YouTubers, how are you today? Welcome back to the channel. Andy here, so nice to see you, especially if this is your first visit with me. Now on today's episode, I'm going to take a look at my top 10 mistakes that admins can make when configuring Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Entra ID. And these are mistakes that can have serious ramifications on your business. So tune in, because I guarantee you will learn something here. Now, if you haven't subscribed, then we would love for you to subscribe. So bump that subscribe button up there, ring that bell, and come and join our great learning community here. And if you've got questions and comments and session requests, by all means, get those down below, and it would be great to hear from you. And if you'd like even more, why not consider signing up to my Patreon site? Here you'll get access to full courses, monthly Zoom calls, and so much more. Details are right here. Now, back to the business at hand, admins. Now, of course, you're thinking, Andy, I'm a demigod. I would never make mistakes. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but we all make mistakes. So in this episode, I'm going to look at my top 10 mistakes that you must just never make. And these are tips and tricks that can help you make such a difference in your business. So if you're ready to learn, let's buckle up and let's take a look. Enjoy. So kicking off, one of the biggest mistakes that admins make, if I come into users, come into active users here, and I'm going to scroll down, and of course many of you know I'm a major Trekkie, and I've got a user here called Jean-Luc Picard. So here in Jean-Luc's account, one big mistake that we all make is that we essentially create a user account, and in this case you can see he's a global admin. First of all, if Jean-Luc uses this account for regular use, you should never have the account as a global admin. So if this is an operational account, then by all means go in and remove that global admin account and save the changes. Now, I would then probably go and create a separate admin account. And remember the key thing about the separate account, you don't need a license. So that's the key thing about admin accounts that users make a mistake about. They say they automatically think they have to have a license. They don't. Now, if you do want to grant the user admin access, rather than being a global admin, let's say, for example, you wanted Jean-Luc to manage user accounts or groups and things like that. That's absolutely fine. Then in that case, you can take advantage of RBAC roles, and you can either assign those roles here in the user properties. So if I go in and choose this, or alternatively, if you'd like to know more, then simply come down into the roles section, and you can see that this provides you with details of all the various roles and specifically the category that they're included in. And of course, if I also come over to Entra ID here, come into the Identity tab and scroll down, and again come into Roles and Admins, you get exactly the same thing here. Now, the one advantage of this here is that you can actually go ahead and create custom roles, and more importantly, the roles that are highlighted here, you can quickly see if they are privileged roles. So if I scroll right down to the bottom here, here's my user admin role here, and you can see I've got an active assignment, and there's Jean-Luc Picard that I just put in. Okay, so first of all, take advantage of RBAC roles. So role-based access control, only provide the user with the access that they need. Okay, this is a principle of zero trust. Okay, it's the principle of least privilege, and this will avoid you getting any major headaches. So there you go, my number 10, RBAC. So for my number 9, I'm going to come in here into the Entra Admin Center. I'm going to come down to the protection blade, and here we have something called identity protection. This is a fantastic tool at protecting your identities, not just for your users, your regular users, but also your sensitive users as well, such as IT managers, CIO, CFO, CEO, and so on. Now, the downside is you do need a P2 license for this. It has just been going through at the moment a major revamp, so it's looking really nice these days. The information that's coming in is like super useful. One thing I would say is that you can, of course, get an overview of it, but specifically what it focuses on is risk. So ultimately, we're in the job of reducing risk within our organization. And to that end, we have a couple of policies here. We have a user sign-in risk policy, and we have a user risk policy. So this is where I can come in here, and you can see in this example, I've selected 3 of my most important users. For example, they could be senior management and so on. And you can categorize them. So you can set the risk level of these users. Okay. So if this is a particularly sensitive account, again, you can categorize them. More than that, though, you can then say, based on that categorization, I'm going to either allow block access, allow access, or require a password change. Personally, I would always just go with the block access. Any kind of sensitive accounts, a password change would potentially cause issues. And ultimately, we want to get away from using passwords as much as possible. Now, along with the risk of the user, you can also do something similar with sign-in risk. So again, I've added my same 3 users. Again, I've added them as a category of high, but this time, instead of blocking access, I require multi-factor authentication. And this is a great additional layer of security. Now, one of the real benefits of identity protection is that you don't just get sign-in reports, but you also get risky sign-in reports. And it shows you if there's any particular risky sign-ins. For example, things like impossible travel. So I sign on today in Edinburgh, and in 15 minutes I sign on from Sydney, Australia. Now, it does know the difference between VPNs, and you can factor that feature in, of course. But the key thing is that it's going to show you risky sign-in activity. And the key thing is I can then block that user if I want to, or I can dismiss it. If it was a VPN, I can say that it's fine. Or more importantly, you can confirm that the user has been compromised. And this kind of connects in with Microsoft's Defender set of products as well, which is super useful. So if you want to gain kind of a little bit more visibility into your users, then this is a really useful feature. Just one additional thing, this is a new feature. So if I go into settings here, if you are one of those organizations like many and you're in hybrid, definitely want to switch this on. It's currently in preview. Allow on-premises password change to reset the user risk. I am not a fan of self-service password write back. This is where in hybrid, the user can go up here, reset their password, and it resets it back to Active Directory as well. Personally, I consider this to be a potential backdoor, and you want to avoid that. But this feature would essentially change the sign-in risk, and it would trigger an alert, and that's quite useful. And it also can connect in, and I really like it where it connects into conditional access, and I've done videos on that in the past. And if you want to see those, check them out in my identity playlist. So there you go, my number 9, identity protection. For my number 8, I'm going to talk about authentication methods. So I've come in here into Entra ID, and as you can see, there's a whole different set of different authentication methods that you can use. So when we talk about multi-factor authentication, it doesn't have to be this daunting for users. So this means I can simply go into one of these policies. So for example, I want to enable, let's say, a FIDO key or smart key. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to say, hey, I want to configure this for all my users. I'm going to say, yeah, I want my users to be able to use this, allow them self-service sign up, and so on. Now, when you configure this, it can take, I've kind of noticed it can take up to about an hour to go through. But again, things like the multi-factor authenticator, these are definitely things that you should have enabled, folks, okay? Because if you don't, it can be an absolute nightmare. Also, for good security, definitely click into the configure option here. Allow the use of one-time passcodes, yes, but also show application name and push passwordless authentication. And you can either choose this, whether it's Microsoft managed, or you can configure it yourself. I really like the third option. This is the geographic location. So the idea is if you get a pop-up that says, hey, I've got a user here, or you're logging in from, let's say, Hong Kong, and you're trying to access Teams, and it will show up that you're in Hong Kong, then you know that if you're in Oslo, that's not right. Okay. And also we can also set up this as an authenticator on a companion application as well. So if you want to use this for other applications, that's also really useful. So definitely take a look at the Microsoft Authenticator. If you want to know more on the different authentication methods, learn.microsoft.com has got some great documentation, folks. So definitely go in and have a look at that. And then, of course, from the user perspective, the user can simply go up here, up to their profile here. I'm currently logged on as Megan, of course, and I can go into her account. And in here, you've got this tab here that says security information. So in the account here, you can see that at the moment, I'm just using something that you should never use, which is just a password. So this is a kind of a serious security flaw. So you really want to either enforce a policy or you want to get the user to select another form of authentication. Now, a security key or a authentication app using biometrics, these are classed as, well, certainly the security key anyway, is what we call phishing resistant. So it's definitely worth setting those up. Okay, so there you go. That's my number 8, ladies and gentlemen. That's the authentication method policies. For my number 7 is probably one of the most important things you can do as an administrator. Believe me, if you have an admin account and you get locked out, you're in real trouble. So Microsoft strongly recommend that you create what we call a recovery account. And you can do this either from within Microsoft 365 or you can do this from Entra ID. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to create a new user and I'm going to call this account recovery. Okay, or recovery user, whatever you want to call it. Again, you can choose. If you have multiple domain names, so if you've got your own corporate domain name, it's strongly recommended that you don't use that you use your tenant.onmicrosoft.com domain name that I have here. Again, I can put in a username for this, but what I would strongly recommend is that you don't auto-generate the password and you use a really, really long password for this, okay? But the key thing is you want to keep this a long passphrase. Now, it's not recommended that you use multi-factor authentication for this particular account, and make sure that the account is actually enabled as well. Then click on assignments. So do I want to add the user to a group or a role? So in this case, I want to come down into the global admin role. So we have the global admin. I click on select, and this user is now a member of that role. So I'm going to go ahead and create this account. So now that I've created that user, I'm just going to scroll down to that user account, and you can see that I now have a user called Recovery. And one thing that you want to do is you want to take a copy of the user's object ID. This could be really important if you need to use PowerShell at a later date. Okay, now for more documentation on this, there is a really good article on learn.microsoft.com explaining why you need access to this account, how to do it, how to create it, and the overall step-by-step guide. I definitely recommend it, and that, my friends, is number 7. So for my number 6 is probably one of the most important things that an admin can do in Microsoft 365. SharePoint sharing settings resonate through every application, from Microsoft Teams to Groups to Dynamics, in fact, everything. And you have to button this down as soon as possible. Now you can come in here into SharePoint, and here in SharePoint we have, of course, the SharePoint Admin Center. Here in the Admin Center, you can see that we have got this area here called Policies. And within Policies, you go into the sharing settings. And these are your default settings for your tenant. Now, in this case, the most permissive is that anyone can share files, including links, that they don't require sign-ins. Now, that means anonymous as well. And you can see that we've got both the SharePoint and the OneDrive options here. What is quite useful is if you want a little more control, you can set this up for new and existing guests that already sign in into your organization. And this is where you can provide a verification code for them to sign in. So again, for example, if you're using Teams, you can invite the guests in here. Likewise, if you want more control and perhaps have a request kind of procedure set up where if you want to share content, you need to maybe fill in a form requesting it. And this is where the admin has to already create the guest within the organization's directory. And again, depending on how sensitive the data is. The least permissive, of course, is that only people in your organization can share. Now, let's say, for example, I've set this up with new and existing guests. You can set some default settings here as well. For example, show the names of users, and I can save that here. And this is my tenant settings. Now, the way that this works is then I can then come in to a per site basis here. So for example, I have a Microsoft team here called London Marketing, and I can then go into the settings and you can see I can set the external file sharing here. An interesting thing is though, you can see that the tenant option for anyone is no longer available, and that is really useful. You can also configure this from within Groups and Teams as well. So I really like that feature. Now, just to mention that I mentioned that's one place that you can go in the SharePoint Admin Center. The other place is you can come into Settings, Organization Settings. If you click onto the Security and Privacy option, click on Sharing, and you get the same options here. So let users add guests from the organization. Again, if you don't want guests, that's a quick way of dealing with it. But you can see you can change the external settings within SharePoint. So there you go. My number 6, sharing. So there you have it, 5 down and 5 to go. Can you guess what's going to be in my top 5? Hey, listen, if you've not subscribed, now would be a good time. Bump that subscribe button, come on board and come and join us. Okay, let's continue. So continuing on, my number 5, and this time it's global admin no-nos. So what I'm going to do is I'm coming into the identity pane here, and I'm going to come down into roles and admins, and in here I've got a list of all my roles and admins. And one of the things that you definitely don't want to have is too many global admins. So I'm going to come in here into the global admin here, and you can see that I've got quite a few global admins. Now, Microsoft really do recommend no more than 5, but typically no less than 2. Okay, and also watch out for things like service accounts. So if you create service accounts, be very careful that you don't give them global admin access. So again, one of the things that you want to do is you want to kind of go in and remove anyone who you think, okay, they don't need global admin access. Remember what I said earlier, why not consider using different types of roles as well? So if you do want them to have global admin, then what you could do is you could give them a reader role. So that means they've got access to see everything, but not necessarily to create or change any settings. And a top tip, what you can do, if you do want that user to obviously create users and manage users and groups, why not consider giving them the user admin role? This is the second most powerful group. And again, it's a fantastic way of just making sure that those permissions don't run away. So for my number 4, I want to talk about guest invite settings. Now, typically we invite guests either as an admin or one kind of admin role by going here, or alternatively, you can go into Microsoft Teams. And this is a really important feature that you get locked down. So we need to come into external identities here. And if we scroll down, there are a number of settings. And particularly, you'll want to take a look at this one here. External collaboration settings. And in here, it says, first of all, guest user access. What level of permissions or restrictions do you want them to have? So you can either have guest users have the same access as members, guest users have limited access to properties and membership of objects, or guest members are restricted to only specific objects, for example, their own, and these are the most restrictive. You can see this is the default setting here. Also, you've got the guest invite settings. So who are you going to allow to invite guests? Anyone, including guests? I don't think so. Member users and roles assigned to specific admin roles. So global admin, user admin, and also things like the guest inviter role. Only users assigned to specific admin roles, or no one can invite guests. So again, you'll definitely want to take a look at this. Self-service flows as if you're using business to consumer and if you're developing your own internal apps and so on. Also, one important thing is when a user joins an organization, by default, they have the option to go into their organization settings in their profile and they can leave the organization. But again, you can control that if you will. So as I said, external identities, super important that you lock these security settings down. So for my number 3, I want to talk about another type of default. This is the security defaults option. And you can find this by going into the main Entra ID admin page. And if you go to the Properties tab, click on Properties, and if you scroll right down to the bottom, there is an option here for security defaults. And it's super important that you get this right. Now, this is just perfect for organizations who, for example, maybe it's a brand new tenant. things are not tied down properly, and you just want to get things going. So what this does is you can see that we've got security defaults here, and essentially it talks about the fact that you can just halt 99% of phishing-based attacks. And what this does is it enables conditional access for your organization, and it by default it sets up a number of default access policies, including all your users and for your admin accounts. Now the thing is, if you have conditional access already or any settings that you have, it may wipe these out, so you may want to avoid using this if you've already configured it. But if you haven't, this is a definite must that you have to switch on. So for my number 2 nightmare, I'm coming in here into Microsoft 365 Admin Center. I've come into the settings pane, and you can see that I've come into the organizational settings and into services. In the services area, we have this option here for modern authentication. And modern authentication means there are 2 ways to authenticate. Classic authentication means that you use a password, and modern authentication means that you can take advantage of features like multi-factor authentication and so on. And we've already discussed how multi-factor authentication can actually prevent up to 99.9% of phishing-based attacks, and particularly if it's phishing-resistant technologies like facial recognition, like multi-factor authentication on devices. However, most of the clients out there, in fact many clients out there, might still have support, in this case, for classic authentication. So this is something that you probably want to switch off. And you might go and say to me, well, Andy, that's fine, but we still have some of those clients. And the problem with that, of course, is that you really are leaving yourself open to potential attack. And if you have to have those clients, then maybe I can suggest that if you come into the likes of conditional access, you can come into a conditional access here. If I come down into conditions, and in the conditions area, we have an option here called client apps. So here in the client apps, you can see we're supporting the modern authentication clients for both browser and mobile and desktop apps. Okay, that will give you multi-factor authentication. But if you are using older clients, what you might want to consider doing is creating a separate conditional access policy for these. Okay, and maybe perhaps only allow them on certain machines and so on. But for the most part, you definitely want to switch these features off because, as I said, it could be a potential backdoor into your organization. So for my number 1 mistake, and I'm sure that we're all guilty for this, is how many times have you assigned permissions to admin roles or to groups or users, and then 2 or 3 years down the line you go, oh my goodness, they've still got access and they shouldn't have access. Well, something that's been missing for a long time is the availability to do access reviews. Well, this feature is now available in Microsoft Entra, and it's been in preview for a long time actually, but now it's actually available for purchase. And you can find it in the identity governance area, and it comes under here of access reviews. Now please note that you can gain access to this either through the groups feature. You can, if I just click on show more there, if I come into the roles and admin, you can see that access reviews is here as well. And also it's in applications as well. So here in the identity governance, just a quick reminder, by the way, that you do need the new Entra ID governance license. And this is on top of a P2 license. So this is very much kind of a feature out there on its own. So to do an access review, you can see I've created a couple here already. I can simply go into new access review. I choose the type of access review. For example, it might be a team. Remember, you can have teams and groups that can contain admin accounts. So in this case, that's what I'm going to choose. I'm going to select my team or my group, and in here I'm going to scroll down, and let's say I'm going to call this my London IT team. So I want to make sure that my London IT team don't have access for too long. I'm going to click on next. So I'm going to do this, and it says, okay, is this a multi-stage review or just a single stage? I'll just leave that as a single stage. Do you want group owners or selected users in groups, or even users can review their own access? Not sure about that one. Or managers of users. So again, I could put in a specific group, or I could say, in this case, we'll have managers. I can also have a fallback account as well. So for example, I've got a user here called Mod. I'm just going to use that user account, and I'm going to say, yep, that's fine, and just click on select. How many, the reoccurrence. So how many reoccurrences do you want, and how often are those occurrences going to take place? So for example, I might say, yep, I want it to be, over the next 4 years. So I'm going to go into here and say once a year, or perhaps even quarterly or semi-annually every 6 months. When's it going to start? You can change the date here, or if you want it to end on a specific date, and so on. Then we can say, okay, what about upon completion? Do you want me to apply the results to the resource? So if reviewers don't respond, what do you want me to do? I'm always a great believer in this. Take the recommendations. So actions to apply on a denied guest user, okay? And again, at the end of the review, send a notification. And I could say, okay, send a notification to the mod administrator or the IT team. Then I can say, okay, enable decision helpers. So for example, if a user hasn't signed in for 30 days, you might want them to put justification, email notification reminders. These are options that you can put in. So we now give the review a name. So I'm just going to call it my London IT review. And you can put in a description if you want to. I get a nice overview, and off I go, and I create that review. But if you just think about the potential problems of leaving resources without any kind of review, it's considered good practice, and that's the reason why it's my number one. So there you have it, my top 10 mistakes that admins should never make. Now, if you would have added something else in the list, I would love to know what it would have been. So put it down there below. Now, if you haven't subscribed, come on, bump that subscribe button, ring that bell, and come and join our great learning community. We'd love to have you on board. And questions and comments, as I said, get those down below. That's it for this time. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. You take care. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.